The Lord, the God of heaven, has designated me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. The book of Ezra, the return from the exile. Here's the introduction from the New Catholic Bible. The history thus far of the Jewish people, whom we last saw in exile, has revealed to us an Israel rather different from the Jewish community that we shall meet later on in the time of Jesus and the Gospels. How was this different Israel formed? The period of restoration, which began in 538 BC, is especially important for anyone who wishes to understand Judaism, the birth and the basic organizations of which are told in two books known as Ezra and Nehemiah. 1 and 2 Esdras in the Vulgate, from the names of the respective personages prominent in them. In narrating the restoration of the Jewish community after its return from the exile, and thereby completing the grandiose picture of the history of salvation that was begun in the book of Chronicles, the author had at his disposal first-order sources which he follows very closely: lists of the families that are returned from the exile, genealogical documents, royal decrees, administrative correspondence, and personal recollections. But his perspective is not that as of a historian. His primary concern is to set forth a teaching regarding a community that still has its place in the plan of God, and to define the major aspects of Jewish life in so new a period of its history. In the interest of producing a clearer picture, he does not restrict himself to a chronological order. This decision, along with the fact that, at that time, numbers were not used to distinguish sovereigns having the same name, creates an awkward situation for anyone attempting a historical reconstruction of the Restoration period. At the same time, however, the following represents a plausible reconstruction of the chronology. Beginning in 538, Edict of Cyrus, the first exiles returned to Palestine under Governor Sheshbazzar. Later on, a second group is led by Zerubbabel, the priest of Joshua. These erected the altar of burnt offering, once again reestablished the order of worship, and lay the foundations of the temple. The envy of their neighbors, however, forces the builders to interrupt their work. Encouraged by the preaching of the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the builders take up their work again in 520 BC. Although they still experience obstacles, 4 years later their temple is consecrated and Passover is celebrated there. And that's Ezra 1 through 6. In 445 BC, Nehemiah, a personal servant of King Artaxerxes I, arrived in Jerusalem with complete authorization to rebuild the walls. The work began and was carried to a successful conclusion, although the Samaritans opposed the project for a long time. Nehemiah 6:12, 14, and Ezra 4. But the wretched condition of the people had led to social disorders, which Nehemiah attempted to eliminate. Nehemiah 5. He also managed to get a few people to come and build their own houses within the circle of walls. He then returned to his functions in Susa in 433 BC, but reappeared in Jerusalem before the death of Artaxerxes in 424 BC. During the second stay, he played a more direct part in the organization of the community and solved various problems: the presence of foreigners, the portions of the Levites, the Sabbath rest, the marriages with pagan women. Finally, he completed the norms of the covenant in chapter 10. Around 383 BC, 398 BC, Ezra's secretary for the Jewish affairs at the court of Persia came to Jerusalem and, in the name of Artaxerxes II, imposed the law of Moses and the law of the state as the law of the state. The community celebrated the Feast of Booths, sent away foreign women, and confessed their sins. In this way, it ratified the law of its behavior. It was now that Judaism was born. Ezra 7 through 10 and Nehemiah 9. Even if events took place in a different order, Ezra, Nehemiah's collaborator, may have gone to Jerusalem under Artaxerxes I. If the king, in this case, was Artaxerxes X, Ezra was quite advanced in age. It would not greatly matter. The important thing is the deeper meaning of the events. These reveal a period of disillusionment, but also one not lacking in greatness. After the high hopes of deliverance that filled some exiles with so much enthusiasm, Israel, now poor, weak, and sinful, saw its dream of restoring the monarchy vanish. But in its poverty, it discovered that it was called to a more spiritual life. In the midst were prophets such as Haggai and Zechariah, who, along with Zerubbabel and Joshua, Nehemiah and Ezra, were the pioneers of this difficult restoration. The main body of the liberated members of Israel settled in the land of their fathers around Jerusalem. The history of salvation began anew. This was a great event, and the chronicler wants to emphasize in these chapters, in which he is assembled around the personages of Ezra. Passages regarding the quite different phases of the period follow upon the exile. The book of Ezra might be divided as follows. 1, the return from exile, which would go from 1:1 to 6:22. And 2, the deeds of Ezra, which would go from 7:1 to 10:44.